In this episode, Tomas Stanton and I talk about poetry, writing, and spoken word as a means to get vulnerable, dig deeper, challenge our perceptions, open to the world, and see ourselves in a new way. Tomas gives us a window into what his workshop will be like at our Speakeasy event on February 15th. Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Welcome to the Flower Lounge. I am really excited to have this week's guest on. He is local here to Phoenix, so I am sitting right across from him, which is very exciting. Tomas Stanton is co-founder of Phonetic Spit. He's a poet. He's a writer. He's a teaching artist and a community activist. He's a teaching artist dedicated to advancing the arts of spoken word. How cool is that? Mm-hmm. And hip-hop as a platform for youth development and civic engagement. He is co-founder of Phoenix's premier youth spoken word ensemble called Phonetic Spit, and he uses hip-hop, pedagogy to inspire youth to boldly express themselves through poetry, dance, and theater. And his work and teaching style is rooted in his childhood experiences of poverty and single-parent household, political issues, identity, and love. Yes. Tomas has over 10 years of experience in youth development and currently works all across the valley, and that's in Phoenix, Arizona, creating safe spaces for youth to express themselves through spoken word. And he will also be helping us host a special event as the night before our Flower Lounge on February 16th. Tomas will be coming in on Friday, February 15th in the evening to our Speakeasy workshop, and he will be leading a full-on spoken word workshop for us. I'm so excited.
It's very exciting. It's very exciting. It's also so weird to hear your bio read out loud sometimes.
Isn't it?
It is. It's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's me.
I did that. I said that. I wrote that. What does that word mean again? Not sure.
So we do this little exercise at the beginning of these podcasts where we have you close your eyes and go back to a time in your childhood when you played around flowers or plants or trees or just somehow in nature or with the weeds in the sidewalk, wherever you grew up, and just think about if you had a favorite flower or botanical, and if you had a favorite, how you would describe its personality in 3 words. And take your time, and whenever you're ready, open your eyes and just share a little bit about what you were thinking and your experience, what you were up to, your favorite, in your 3 words.
So I went back to a time where, so my first thought was this time where growing up in Arizona, we had a lot of cactus. So that was kind of the thing that was most present in my life in terms of, I mean, would you consider a cactus? It's not a flower. It blooms flowers. It's a plant, right?
Yeah.
There's a thing called a jumping cactus. I think it's the cholla cactus.
Yeah.
And as a kid, you know, I was always told to don't get too close to this cactus because it's a jumping cactus. And as a young person, I think this is why I went back there immediately, was because I was like, am I allowed to use profanity?
Of course you can.
I as a kid, I was like, holy shit, this cactus will jump you. You know, if you get too close, this is dangerous, you know.
Mother Nature's out to get you.
Yeah, right. But I also always kind of teetered on this line of danger. Mm-hmm. And anyways, there was a couple houses down from where I grew up. There was this jumping cactus, and I don't know how it happened, but I got too close to the cactus and it jumped me. It did. I remember coming home and crying, and I had spines.
I like how you didn't say it jumped on me.
It jumped me. And my grandmother, it was they had there was no position. I couldn't sit down because I had some in my back. Aww. And, you know, and they had to take the spines out. And yeah. And what, even going back there now, I don't like I legitimately was, I think it did jump on me, you know, even though now as an adult I know that's not how it works. They just fall off really easily. But I don't remember like getting close enough for it to just fall off.
You didn't have like a hoodie or something?
No, I don't know. I don't remember, but I do remember that very specifically. And I've always kind of enjoyed cactuses. Like you know, even that one where you know, it was slightly dangerous. My grandfather had aloe vera planted in the backyard, and just the ability to use that, you know, as medicine. I think for me, you know, definitely growing up, flowers were aesthetically beautiful. They smelled beautiful. They looked beautiful, but I never knew them to be like anything other than just, you know, looking beautiful or smelling beautiful. Like couldn't use them. Like this is I now know that that's not true. But cactuses, specifically like the aloe vera, you can use them as medicine. And the nopales, you can eat those. And so yeah, I think I've always been attracted to cactuses.
So if you were to describe them or their personality or their qualities in 3 words, how would you describe them?
Dangerous, healing. See, I'm a poet now, so I'm trying to make this last word
Don't
really
think too
like
hard.
dangerous, healing motherfuckers. Dangerous, healing motherfuckers.
What does motherfuckers mean?
You just gotta throw that in there.
What does that mean, though? When you say, it's a motherfucker, what does that mean?
I could be, because like I think of a growing up also like motherfucker for some reason.
Is it like mischievous? Like it gets you in the butt? Like
That's yeah. It's a like an all around. It's a multi-purpose type of person. So yeah. So multi-purpose maybe is a dangerous, healing, multi-purpose, multifaceted. There's layers to cactuses for sure.
Okay. Well, what we find is that the way you describe your childhood favorite is how you bring your greatest gifts into the world.
Oh, yes.
Dangerously.
Oh my God, yes.
As medicine and healing. And kind of like a motherfucker. So multi-purpose, multifaceted, and layers to you and your work.
Wow. That's crazy.
Does that fit?
Absolutely. so scary, like, to hear that out loud, because yeah, I mean, I teeter the line of danger.
What's the dangerous part?
The dangerous part of me is my constant struggle to conform to what the world says you should do or you should be. You know, I'm not dangerous. I'm actually extremely cautious in life, and you know, in terms of like real danger. Like I'm slightly antisocial because, you know, I don't like to be in confined spaces. But like the danger, I think, is in life, especially as an adult. And then if you're like, I have kids, so if you're responsible for other kids, you know, the closest you can stay to the norms, the better off you're going to be. In some ways, they sell you on that, you know, the closest you can stay to the norms, which is part of the reason why I generally didn't want to have like a family or anything like that, because I never wanted to be confined to the norms, you know. But I think that if it's risky to step outside of those norms and to take on the judgment of people. And so the danger for me is mostly like, I feel like I have a double life. I definitely have a double life, you know, in most instances, you know. And
because you feel like you're leaving social norms, dangerously
I
living
feel
on the
like
edge of...
I feel like if I could be free, like I would step so far outside. No, I don't know so far, but I definitely would step outside of a lot of social norms. I don't know if you're interested in like astrology or anything like that, but
Yeah, we love
like,
astrology.
you know, I'm an Aquarius, and
Okay.
so you know, oftentimes if described as very aloof and you know an air sign,
Humanitarian.
and yeah, humanitarian for sure, but like innovative, like all of those things, but also like definitely don't want to be in one place for too long, and you know, like very committed to the uncommitted, if that's, you know what I mean? Like things like that. And so yeah, so I think that's kind of like where I feel the most dangerous is like just trying to juggle the perception that most people will accept and love
Of you.
of me, but then also trying to stay true to who I feel I am inside. The fear, though, is that if I ever fully lived my full life, you know, I'd just be labeled a weirdo, and not in a good way. Yeah.
I don't know. I love that. I mean, you're in good company because we're on episode well into the 70s, and every single person I've interviewed is like living out on some edge, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I love people who are living different kinds of lives.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. So when you are working with your poetry, do you feel like you get to work with that sense of dangerousness? Like, can you express those, you know, or like dip your toe into expressing those parts of you that you feel like, yikes, dangerous realm over there?
Yeah, absolutely. And majority of the time, so the interesting thing about poetry, especially spoken word, is that people hear it, and because it's coming from you and because it's this form of expression, they a lot of times will be like, oh, that's truly who he is. But then also, is it? You know, because it's like, is that, you know, and then, you know, if you get really fancy with metaphor, and which from time to time especially when I'm kind of like dipping my toe into like things that are against the grain, you know, like using metaphor and trying to code it enough to where it's like not fully just coming out and saying directly. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a space where I feel like I can investigate those things, talk them through, write them through, talk them through, but then also investigate the response of people. You know, see how people, you know, respond to certain things. I have a poem that I use. I won't, it's actually how I introduce most workshops, especially in the beginning. It's called my honest poem, but it's a poem that essentially is, it's funny because when somebody reads my bio, the poem is everything that my bio doesn't tell you about me. But, and in many ways, the things that are in this poem that my bio doesn't tell you about me are actually more important and more vital to who I am than the things that my bio tells you.
Of course.
You know, and it just like kind of lists off all these things that I still, you know, and I wrote that poem probably 6 years ago. And it's funny because a lot of my life has changed in 6 years, but so much is still the same, which is interesting. Like I still recite some of the lines in the poem and I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely still there. You know, I definitely haven't worked that one out, you know, so yeah.
And how often do you find yourself able to write?
Nowadays,
yeah,
you know, I write. So when I first started writing was specifically for spoken word poetry. I wasn't interested in like poetry in any other format than spoken word. And generally speaking, a spoken word poem is between 3 and 5 minutes, which if you do the math on that, that's about 800 to 600 to 800, maybe 1,000 words, right? So it's a decent amount of time to write that much. Nowadays, I write much shorter poems, definitely more snapshots of things. And I try to write daily. I definitely, and I do, but sometimes it's just a sentence, or sometimes it's just me capturing a moment of inspiration that in the past, when I was less busy, I could take that moment of inspiration and write a whole poem. And now I'm like, I just got to capture this right now and put a pin in it. And maybe I'll get to it, in a month or 2 or 3 or 4. But yeah, so I still try to write daily because writing is a practice. I don't believe in writer's block. One of my biggest mentors is a playwright, a hip hop theater playwright. And he said that he doesn't believe in writer's block, that, writers write. You may not be writing your next great hit or, but you're writing every day.
I used to, I hit a moment when I was writing my book, and my writing coach recommended I read this one chapter from an Anne Lamott book called Shitty First Drafts. And it was, this beautiful, eloquently written chapter about, how you might just vomit out a bunch of stuff, and then you'll have like one golden thread line in there that you find, and it takes you somewhere else. That if you hadn't written that whole shitty first draft, you wouldn't have found that thread of gold to take to the next step, which is so interesting.
It's crucial. It's crucial to writers, I think, to always like vomit, like just vomit on a page and see, if there's anything there at some point, but also not to worry about it. Like, even like whether there's something there or not, don't worry about it, because I think writing, at least for me, writing is like, it's the way I process things. Some people sit down and they talk things out, and I definitely do that. That's what podcasts are for sometimes, or just good conversations. But like, writing is a conversation with myself, right? I'm having a conversation with myself about something. And a lot of times the first layer, the first draft, is the idealistic thing. It's like this, like, take a serious topic, for example, let's talk, a political issue or something, right? You may have an idealistic idea of what you believe the answer to that issue is, right? And so the first draft is this idealistic idea. And at least for me, at some point I'm going to read that and I'm going to be mad at myself, because I'm like, dude, that's you put too much of a pretty bow on that. Like, what do you really feel about that situation? Like, how do you really feel? And it's like, oh, well, this is how I really feel, And so now I'm finding it's interesting too, because in spoken word, is if I had to categorize it in a spectrum of politics and ideology, like, spoken word is very left-leaning ideology, right? You get a lot of folks that are up kind of talking about all the ways that, the systems suck, and yeah, there's some truth to that, right? But I'm not, I don't think anyone is, at least generally speaking, is not, it's a spectrum, right? And like and your experiences change. And, I definitely look at things that I write, and I write them to my audience, which is generally this left-leaning kind of thing. And then I have to question, I'm like, do I really believe in that? Do I really believe that? Or is there some more nuance that I haven't investigated in this particular thing? And how do I make myself vulnerable, right, in this particular instance, and really take, again, a risk of saying something that somebody might be like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, I thought you were this person. And it's like, well, kind of, but being a human is spectrum. It's fluid. Right. I'm just thinking about this differently. Right. I have a line in a poem where I called out the American dream that conservative America so viciously protects. There's a line in a poem talking about immigration. And this was at a time when I had an emotional reaction to the way certain folks were being treated. And I felt like the enemy was conservative America, right? And then I started to talk to people, conservative people, right? And started to realize that not all conservative people believe this. Not all conservative think, like you can't just put all conservatives in one particular, category. And then I realized, like I was like the American dream that conservative America so viciously protects. And then I started thinking about, okay, well, like this American dream. And I was like, I take advantage of this American dream, right? And I got an opportunity to perform this poem for the Obama Foundation. And they had their legal team. They asked for the poem in advance because the Obama Foundation is a nonpartisan. Like they had like very strict rules, and their legal team had to go through my poem. And they're like, the team was like, they sent me notes, which is kind of weird. I've never had anybody do that. And they sent me these notes, and they're like, oh man, this poem is amazing. We love it. But like this part, we need you to take this part out. And it was the conservative American part. And it was because they didn't want anyone to hear that being read at an Obama Foundation event and think that Obama was pushing a liberal agenda, right? And at first I was like, no, I'm not taking it out, And, but then I started to investigate, and I was like, you know what? Like, not all conservatives feel this way, And then I was like, you know what, Tomas? What are you conservative on? What are the things that you're conservative on? And how do you treat the American dream? And so eventually the line was like, the American dream that I myself often take for granted. I removed the entire part because it's not fair to all conservatives to be lumped into this category. And the truth is like, I shouldn't be talking about what conservative America is doing. Through my poetry, I should talk about me.
Yeah.
That's anyway, that was powerful. Very tangential. Sorry.
No, I totally love that. I mean, I'm following you every step of the way. And I think that whenever we make our writing or sharing of experiences like the most rawly about ourselves, it's kind of like the only place we can really speak from.
Yeah.
Is from our own experience.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to get off the soapbox.
I love it.
Get off the soapbox and
actually really dig deep.
Yeah. And tell your story.
Right.
Like you can talk about these issues, but tell them through your experiences and try to refrain from like these buzzwordy type of things that in spoken word are guaranteed to get you snaps and applause and and it's like, okay, that feels good, but life is more than just
being praised,
but also being praised for just saying buzzwordy things. It's so like, we're like, dude, there is so much nuance in this world that, like buzzwords and like that kind of stuff, in my opinion, is like, it is the anti-nuance. Right?
So when you're teaching, it sounds like because this is what you're doing in your own practice, you're also teaching other people to really dig deep and say what's real for them versus kind of glossing over painting a picture of something that other people are saying or being influenced by other stories. Really telling your own story. Yeah. And how does somebody argue with that, right? Like no one can argue with anyone's personal story, no matter which agenda. There is no agenda because it's a personal story.
Yeah.
So I have never really written in my life, but I went through an experience when I was 40, a couple of years ago, it so swept me off my feet and like energized me, but also like ripped out my heart. And it was just like all I could kind of barely do to survive was to write. If you want to call it poetry, you could call it poetry. But I didn't see it that way. It was more just like the experience was so supercharged and rattling for me, and I couldn't understand it, that I had to like shove it into some form that I could try to explain what I was experiencing. And that resulted in like, I don't know, maybe like 111 pieces and 333 pages that, eventually gets edited down. But what do you recommend to folks who would not consider themselves writers, I mean, I guess I did write a book, but I still don't think of myself as a writer. But like, how do you use writing to move you through like a really challenging experience?
Yeah. I think so. One of the things that I'm really interested in at this point in my life is demystifying creativity, right? Because a lot of times creativity is, people think you either got it or you don't, that you're born a creative. You know, a lot of times like, oh, I don't write, or I'm not creative, or I'm not an artist, I can't do that, right? When the reality is much like writing, creativity is a practice. And so, and creativity has many vessels, right? And so I don't consider myself, I'm certainly not a scholarly writer. You know, like I don't have an MFA in poetry. I break all of the rules. I don't spell very well. You know, I don't even, you know, I didn't graduate high school. And so I think that formal education is important, right? But it's definitely not the end all be all, and certainly not in terms of creativity. And so what I try to tell people is kind of like what you're saying is like approach writing as just you having a conversation with yourself. It's you and the page, right? Write it down, see where it goes, right? Enjoy the adventure. You know, try not to, it may, you know, approach it as if this may be a book that gets published, or this may be something that you throw in the fireplace, like, or this may be something that you put in a notebook that you know, abandon for 10 years. Like, try not to think about that, right? Try not to think about the destination of, I mean, you know,
Right.
the destination of where it's going to go, but like
Right.
enjoy the journey of it and have fun. And when you kind of, and that's one of the beautiful things about poets. Funny because academic poetry, and not all of them, but academic poetry has so many rules, right? And rules sometimes are like, it's
I
like,
hate rules.
yeah, it's like, well, but it's also like, you know, like creative, like the, one of the biggest blocks of creativity is rules, right? It's just like, just go out there and take a risk. And, but going back to kind of what I explained to people is just like, just you're having a conversation with yourself. You're taking an experience, you're processing it through your memory. And that's a whole nother journey too, because your memory is, you know, like there's many memories that are all kind of circling in there. And then you're putting it on paper, and just do that. Don't think about it. Like the editor, right? So with our workshop, we have the creative content creation, then we have the editing, you know, and editing is important. But when you're in that creative space, the editor is a jerk. The editor is going to come in and nah, you got to change this line, or, you know, you're saying this in a clunky way, or, you know, but in the creative process, like, you don't want that person there. You just want to get it all out on paper. And the worst thing that you can do is tell yourself and try to justify why you shouldn't be doing this. Well, I'm not a writer. No, okay, cool. You're writing. I'm also not a licensed contractor, but that doesn't stop me from figuring out how to paint my stairs, you know, or install some new hardware on my kitchen cabinets, you know, like you can be creative without, and I'm using air quotes because we're on a podcast, without being, you know, this person, right? Don't set yourself up to fail in that way. And a lot of times they do it because they don't want to be embarrassed. And when I say they, I know because this is my thing. You know, one of the rules of sharing, especially in the workshop, is no disclaimers.
Ooh, I love
No
that.
disclaimers.
Oh, I love that.
You know, do not get up and say, okay, well, this isn't as good as Katie's, but I'm gonna, no disclaimers. Just read it. You know, like, because now you're disclaiming, because you're trying to prepare us for if it sucks that you at least warned us that it was going to suck, you know?
Aw.
And that's not cool, you know, because it's not about it being good or bad. It's like, dude, if you wrote it, you know, and
It's a
it
piece of
means
you.
something to you, it's a piece of you and you're offering that to the world. And that is like one of the main fabrics of humanity, is us being able to share our experiences in hopes that it will continue on. Somebody will be inspired by that experience, and then they'll create the next link in the chain, and then they'll share it. And, you know, this is how we connect. The closest distance between two people is a story. Right. We don't, you know, if we don't know each other and our experiences, but we both share stories, now we've connected. Yeah.
And do you find that the more riskier and dangerous-ier you are about, if that's a word, dangerous-ier.
I'm not a professional speaker.
That's not a word, but
Your
we made
poetic license to make up words.
Do you find that the more vulnerable you're willing to be with yourself in your writing, that the more you connect with the person who's either reading or listening your work?
Yeah, I think so. I think vulnerability is the key to just in life in general. It is the hardest thing to do. I mean, even at the beginning of this session, you know, when we were talking about the dangerous, you know, like, what do you do that's dangerous? You know, I gave you a very vague answer. I try to live between the norms and not, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like, what does that mean?
What does that even mean? Can you give me some more details, please? Like, give me a specific example, right? But in order to give you a specific example, I would literally have to set myself up for judgment, right? I would tell you something, and then your natural human response would be to process what I say and then either be like, oh, I totally agree, or like, oh my God, gross, you know, like that. And that's what vulnerability is that when you set yourself up for judgment, is the scariest thing, I think, in the world, especially as an adult. Because we work our whole lives, I think, as adults to develop an identity that oftentimes connects to our livelihood, that allows us to, you know, continue to move forward in the world. And it's like nobody wants to risk losing that, right? So if you're say a very successful CEO and you're coming into this, you know, speakeasy, and we're all writing poems about what our bios don't tell us about each other, right? You have to make a choice to say something and have the room be like, oh my God, like, did they really say that? You know, the crazy thing, but here's the thing, right? So it's like, but, and this is going to be a very serious, embarrassing example of this, but we hosted a storytelling event. We do one monthly. And a couple months ago, the theme was I almost bleeped my pants, right? Which could be literal or it could be metaphorically, right? For me, it's very literal because I don't know where it happened. At some point in my life, I developed a poop phobia, right? I don't know if it was in like elementary school where like people picked on you or whatever it was, but like, you know, and so I had like a million stories of like these like very, very real scary moments where I was like, oh my God, you know? And so I took a risk. I started the show off because I always try to lead by example. So I started the show off and I told this story about how I almost pooped my pants in the first day of college at a Christian college. And if it wasn't for the saving grace of the prayer where everyone bowed their head and I was able to sneak out of the classroom, right? This is such an epic story. And it was because it was my first day of college, and in the cafeteria, you paid like $5 and it was like buffet style. And I was just drinking apple juice. I never got to drink apple juice that much. And I'm just pouring apple juice. And by the time I get to class, my stomach's like blue, 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 blue. So anyways, so I tell the story, right? And then all of a sudden, almost every single person up after was just telling a story about this. And it was one of the most amazing nights because we all got to connect on this thing that like most people would never, ever tell this story about themselves, especially not the CEO who's like, people probably like, the CEO doesn't poop. Like everyone knows that. Like
Doesn't
CEOs
crap
don't
his
poop.
pants
No,
either.
at all, you know. But you take this risk and you share something that most people want to share, and then you create a synergy, and like that's a beautiful experience, you know. So,
And I'm not really sure what the question is here, but it's like writing to be read, writing and then sharing it. Talk a little bit about the difference of writing and someone may or may not read it, and writing and you're actually reading it or speaking it.
Yes. So this is where there are some mechanical kind of like technical aspects, right?
Sure.
So I teach a workshop for a program. It's a no, I always say recitation. That's when you bring somebody back to life. Resuscitation.
Yeah.
Recitation is when you bring somebody back to life. Recitation is when you memorize something and then you recite it. Yeah. Okay. So it's a recitation competition. So it's all about the performance, right? And there's this pie chart, right, where, and I'm sure there's various different types of, you know, it varies in percentages, but 90% of communication is body language and intonation, right? So that means that if I write something, only 10% of that, right, is the written work. 90%, like a bigger, is how I perform it, right? So you have to, when you're performing, you have the opportunity to add in like intonation, you have the opportunity to add in like gestures. And generally speaking, I think, you know, as humans, we spoke before we wrote. So I think it's more natural for us to tell stories orally than it is writing. But we also, the thing about writing, and this is what I tell people all the time, is that a performance, you have to be there. Like if I'm performing for 10 people or 20 people, like if you weren't there, you didn't get it, right? Whereas if I write something, I can send that to the world, right? And so it's this really weird, like kind of balance of like what's more important, right? And so one of the practices is make it so that your piece stands up on paper as well as it does in a performance, you know, and that's kind of a fine balance, right? Is like, you know, because the other thing is that if you're a really super animated person and you have all these like really good performance skills, you can perform the hell out of a really shitty piece of work, not to call anybody's work shitty, but you know what I mean? So really focus on the writing, you know, and understand that there's value in both of those. And then if you get the opportunity to perform it, then take that writing and then you can build in all the performance aspects of it. Or if you writing it just for a book, but you know what I mean? So it's strong either way.
Okay, so then I'm like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about that performance word. Like, what's the difference between reading your work and it's raw and it's vulnerable and you try your damnedest to like reach down inside yourself and find where it's like the most tender and read it from that point? What's the difference between that, you know, pin drop electric kind of feeling and performance? Like,
yeah, I know.
And how do you know, I'm going with this.
Yeah.
I think of performance in terms of like, you're not real, you're performing. Tell me about that.
I think, yeah, it's interesting, right? Because how do you, so say, for example, I have a poem about contemplating suicide, right? This is a serious situation. How do I perform that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is it going to be genuine? Like, you know, like, and I think both. So what's really important, I think, in that particular thing is that, all right, I'm processing as I'm talking. So I just presented at the city managers conference.
Sure.
So this is an opportunity where I am in front of 200 people. Most of them are city managers or, assistant city managers and things like that. And I do my honest poem, right? And in my honest poem, I'm talking about some fairly, at a minimum, like my interpretation of a city manager is that they're going to hear something in there and be like, why is he doing this? Why am I sitting here listening to this guy talk about this? This is a conference. You're supposed to be teaching me about how to run a city, right? These are all of the things, like 5 minutes before I'm on. These are all the things that are running through my head.
Right.
And I tell myself the same thing that I tell myself whenever I kind of get this type of, like, this feeling out, or this type of feeling of anxiety. And this is what I tell my students all the time, is that life is never promised, right? This literally may be the last time anybody ever hears me speak. I can get into my car, drive home from Sedona, blow a tire, not make it, right? And that's a very tragic thing to think about, but like,
it's true.
that's true,
it's
right?
True.
Yeah. So I performed the hell out of the poem because I'm a super animated person and I enjoy performance, right? For me personally, performance is, and I don't know that performance is the right word. I don't know what another word is, but like,
not something other than you.
It's not other than me. It is who I am, and it's how I cry. When I was young, I was had a lot of pent up aggression, and like I would punch holes in walls, and I do these very just like extreme acts of violence, to get my frustration out. So when I perform, I am able to have these extreme acts of performative techniques, right? But the essence of what I'm saying and the way that I approach saying it, right, is from my heart and my soul.
Mm-hmm.
And I told myself, before, like right before I went on, I was like, who cares what they think, right? They asked you to be here. Be as authentic as you possibly can. I 110% believe in the words that I wrote. Like, it's one of my most honest and open poems that I've ever written. And I believe in them, right? And then also, I'm teaching a workshop after this, right? So this performance just leads me into my workshop. And I believe 110% in that workshop. And if 50% of the room is like, this is stupid and I don't care, then that's cool. I laid it all on the table and I can walk away. And that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be uncomfortable, right? It doesn't mean that if the whole room was just looking at me, or even if they like started booing, like, boo, get this guy out of here. That would feel really uncomfortable, and I'd probably be embarrassed and sad. But like, at least I can tell myself, well, you know what? They were booing who you truly are. And that says more about them than it does about you. So to go back to your initial question is like, approach, if you have a piece and this piece is like this very vulnerable piece of work that you wrote, and who you are as an individual is not necessarily the most animated, or and you get up and read that poem, if you read it and you are genuinely giving us all of you, if anybody in that space was like, I didn't come here to hear somebody just read, right? That's not about you. That's about that person,
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully this space is, curated in a way where everyone is like understanding the importance of like, we're here to share and to build, right? But also, if somebody came up after you and did a similar type of, poem or story, but they were super animated, right? If they, generally speaking, if they were, people can somewhat tell if someone's being authentic or not, and like their performance may have been more entertaining than yours, right?
They
But
weren't really raw.
yeah, it was fake.
Right.
It was like, I saw a guy the other day at an open mic, get up on an open mic in a bar,
Mhm.
right? Which is always tricky because, there's alcohol, people might be talking.
Right.
And anyway, somebody was talking in the back and he got up and he like berated the guy. It was like, yo, man, like nothing that you're saying is more important than what's going up on the mic. And I'm from such and such city, and like really got like aggressive.
Wow.
And I was just like, and the crazy thing was I kind of agreed with what he was saying. Like, hey man, like have some respect, like there's a
Right.
poet's up here sharing.
Right.
But the way he performed it was like like
The delivery.
I was like, dude, like why are you acting all tough up on the stage? Like, why are you doing that? Like you don't have to perform that like extreme masculinity right now. Like you could have said what so it's like I read that what he was saying wasn't genuine, and I think that that's kind of like, so for you, if you approach it, I feel like I'm talking so much right now, but if you approach it as a genuine, like you're just like genuinely being who you are. If it's performative,
You can't go wrong.
You can't go wrong, right?
Because people will feel that.
Yeah.
What's interesting is going back I'm thinking about my experience here of writing and going back. So allowing yourself to have full creative roaming, right? And then going back like a year later to edit. And one thing that really surprised me is the ability to see the different parts of yourself and personalities in writing, and that you might shift, like literally in your writing, you can see the wild one, and then you can see when the one who sort of like clamps down on the wild one comes in, or say the part of you that can be really raw and open and vulnerable, and then a few words later you see the aloof one start to try to protect. I was like fascinated by that. Like in some ways when you write, you're so transparent, and I had no idea how transparent.
Yeah.
And could see things about myself and my responses to difficult situations that I didn't even know about.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that I had, the police woman who'd come out and be like, all right, that's enough, So I wondered if you could speak a little bit to the use of writing or spoken word to discover parts of yourself that you haven't seen before.
I think the most important part of what you said is you wrote something and then in a moment, right? You wrote it at a moment where maybe the feeling was super raw, which oftentimes is the case, right? You usually experience something, you're inspired, you write about it, you're processing it through all of this emotion, right? So there's going to be a lot of different things going on in that particular piece of writing. And then you come back to it a year later and you've had a whole year to then one, come down from the emotion, to analyze it in a different way, right? You've probably grown from the experience that that initially caused you to write it,
right?
And now you're reading it and you're like, oh, that wasn't like that. I wasn't being like super honest right there, or I wasn't being super genuine, or maybe I was, or maybe that's not even the right way to say it. It's like, man, like at that time emotionally that's how I felt, but like this isn't who I am, right? I mean, I think that because once again, writing is just, and not all writing. I only have experience writing personal poetic narratives. I've never really written, I don't write for other people. I don't write fiction or stories like that. I write for myself, by myself, about my experiences in the world. I mean, it's just a way. I think about it in the sense that, if somebody you care about and that person hurts you, and in the moment you say things to that person that you felt were the right thing to say at that particular time, and then you remove yourself from that situation, you calm down, and then all of a sudden you're like, I wouldn't have said it that way now, that doesn't mean what you said wasn't who you were and authentic, but it's like we're complex individuals. Like we're as humans, I think like we're all slightly, I don't want to I'm not trying to make fun of like mental illness or anything like that, but like
No, we're all crazy. We're for sure all crazy.
I'm definitely slightly schizophrenic. Like
all humans are crazy.
I got quite a few different personalities in me, you know, and it's like, and they're all valid and they all are competing for my attention. And, you know, so I think, you know, for me, the best part of writing is to be able to go back and a year later and watch your growth, right? And watch
also, like what your coping skills were at the time, like how you were, you know, touching into overwhelm and then recovering.
Yeah. And watch your evolution as a human being. Like it is so beautiful to see that and to witness that. And that's one of the things that for me, what I love about spoken word poetry, especially because it's personal, poetic. Like my honest poem, for example, I wrote it 5 years ago. And there's a lot about that particular poem that is still true, right? But there is also parts of that poem where I've evolved. And it's like, and so this is going back to that performance side, is like, sure, I could perform the poem as is, right? That I wrote it 5 years ago and it would still be really good, but like it wouldn't be all the way genuine.
So you take certain parts out.
Or I evolve them, right? I definitely change certain things or I add to them, you know, like there's a line that in the poem where I say, you know, I've never hit a woman and I never will. And this is this vulnerable part, right? I said, but I've slept with multiple women whose names I struggle to remember. Right. And that was the end of the line. Right. And I was really trying to point out, sure, I've never hit a woman, but I've kind of done some really shitty things over here. Right. And then I had a son. Right. And eventually, and then I had to edit that poem to perform it in front of kids. So obviously I can't talk about having sex in front of kids. I should be able to, but in a high school. And so I edited the line and it just naturally came out where it was like, I've never hit a woman and I never will, but I have broken the hearts of women whose names I've struggled to remember. And one of my goals as the father is to teach my son that's kind of like the same thing. So it evolved. So at first it was just a way for me to say, look, a lot of people look at me and think I'm a great person, but I'm actually kind of a shitty person. And then it evolved to like, a lot of people look at me and think I'm a great person, but I'm actually kind of a shitty person. But here's my way to rectify that. Is like, now I'm going to teach my son that that's kind of like the same thing, you know? So the poem, it wasn't done.
It probably still isn't.
No.
What is the role of compassion in writing and spoken word practices? Compassion for yourself and compassion for others.
That's interesting. I never thought about that. I think it's, I think compassion. So I've never thought about it in the context of writing, but I definitely have been thinking a lot about it in the context of the state of the world that we're in now, right? And I feel like there's a lot of, we don't have compassion for people, right? Generally speaking, or at least our first reaction. And I've been connecting this a lot too. So this is going to go slightly left for a second. So I apologize. Yeah.
Do we have compassion for ourselves?
Well, do we? I don't know. Like I don't know. Like
I think it starts with ourselves. And I think that just like listening to you talk about your honest poem, you had to have touched into like such a deep well of self-compassion to even be able to share, right? Or like self-understanding in some level.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I think.
Which would then allow you to have more compassion for others.
I have more compassion for others than I do for myself, generally speaking. I'm usually harder on myself than I am on other people.
I think that's typical.
Yeah. And so I definitely try to write through a lens of nuance and a lens of complexity, but like with a foundation of compassion. But I'm definitely trying to be so part of the for me, it's having more compassion for myself, I think, is me being honest about things that go against what's popular, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
The best way to describe it is, like, for example, immigration. Very compassionate to just the human experience. And when I think about immigration, it tears me up. That's when I think about kids and things of that nature. Like, there's definitely a part of me that, like, so I could write a poem and get on a soapbox per se and tell you all the reasons why we need to be more compassionate as humans towards a topic such as immigration. But that's not me being entirely honest, right? Because I'm also like, well, it's nuanced, it's complex. Do you know some of the solutions that people have been throwing up are, no borders. I'm like, I don't know if that's the answer. Build a wall. I don't know if that's the answer, right? And it's like, if you either subscribe to this one or you subscribe to this one, right? So the compassion that I'm trying to have for myself is to, for example, in that poem that I wrote, like to take the line out where I'm trying to pretend that all conservatives are this because that's fancy and that aligns with this ideology, and bring it more to myself and like be compassionate that I don't have the answer, and be honest and say, hey, like, yes, we do need to be more compassionate, but so how do we figure this out? How do we
It allows you to come from a position of neutrality and openness versus pride and self-righteousness.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just and I think part of being compassionate with who you are, compassionate to yourself, is like, is you have to it's a fine line. I think it's the weirdest thing I think in the world is the balance between enjoying the moment and being selfish with the beauty of life, right? But not so selfish that you are enjoying life at the cost of other people not enjoying life, right? That's the balancing act for me. It's like, how do I display compassion with, like, you know what I mean?
Well, and then just to kind of stretch our minds here a little bit is like, what if, and I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Get it. No one wants to enjoy at the expense of somebody else.
Yeah.
And what if we lived in a world where what is good for you is good for everyone?
Yeah.
What's best for me is best for everyone.
Yeah.
That's kind of an exciting thought.
Yeah.
Like, if you from this day onward and I from this day onward never, ever, ever made another decision that would stretch us too thin, fatigue us, that kind of thing, that we just always did what was best for our own, bodies and minds, that actually would be the best for everyone else also.
Yeah.
It's kind of a cool thought.
It's the utopic. I think it is. It's the reality, right? But also, and I just thought of this right now. It's like, how naive of me to believe that I am the only person that can help somebody out, right? So it's like, I have to completely exhaust myself, right? Which oftentimes, if I deplete myself to help other people out, sure, maybe I've helped those folks out, but now I've at the cost of my own well-being, right? Or I can say, you know what? As much as I want to help this individual out, like right now, I really need to take care of myself. And that person in that moment might be like, maybe feel some despair or like, oh my God, like Tomas is the only person that can help me. And it's like, no, actually, Katie can help you too, right? Like, who knows who else is out there that their well is a little fuller than mine at the moment,
Or
you know?
the
And
person would discover the strength within and go, oh shit, I
yeah,
thought I needed help, but I totally got this myself.
yeah, man, that's a moment. I just had an epiphany right now. You can tell we talked off the mic. Like I've been struggling a lot with guilt, you know, of trying to going back to your first thing that you said, you know, of the dangerous. Yeah, I've explained the danger, but like I also said medicine, right? I want to be a healer. I want to heal people. I don't want to heal people. I just want to make the world an enjoyable place, right? I want to rid people of like any pain or suffering, even though I know pain and suffering is what makes us stronger, right? And that's, you know, even connecting that to my storytelling, like I do an exercise. It's a personal exercise of values. Like what are your values, right? But and then how do your values connect to what you do, right? So like your values as an individual connect to what you do with your company, right? And as a storyteller, one of my biggest values is humor. And I love humor because I love to laugh, and I know that laughter is a very important part of healing people. And so I definitely try to incorporate humor into what I do. So, but I can't deplete myself so low that then I'm no good to anybody.
Well, and you don't see that in nature, right? Like you see a lot of sharing going on. Like the mother trees will be feeding the trees underneath and housing birds and you know, but you don't see it to the expense of the livelihood of the tree. Like you don't see a tree dying because it let it, you know, so many birds hang around in its branches and let all the other trees around in the area just like suck all its vitality out.
Yeah.
So I believe there must be then a way that all of us can experience total abundance in every which way. And how liberating that is. You know, I used to have, you know, much greater savior complex.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized that by doing that, I was sort of taking away individuals, like my belief in their ability to figure it out themselves.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh damn.
Yeah.
Like that feels not good either.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think about like how liberating it is to just think, if I really want to help the world, the only thing I need to do is unravel myself.
Mm-hmm.
And as I unravel my own pains and sufferings and joys and become more and more and more committed to being present in every moment and being aware of every breath that I take, that's in fact the most powerful offering I could give the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's a liberating thought, right? Because if you think about all the beings in this world, it's like, oh my God, it's overwhelming. Sometimes you're driving in the freeway or you're in Tokyo or Chicago or LA and you're just like looking at all the human beings in this world. It's like, oh my God. And if you think about like, you know, your own suffering and you think about human suffering everywhere, it's like, but if you just know, okay, I just have myself to work on, it's kind of a liberating thought.
Yeah, it is. And just by default, I think if you're doing well, you're going to give to the world, and just in the same way that like the trees, you know, like the trees take care of themselves, and because they're taking care of themselves, they're providing opportunities to provide refuge, and you know, and so like you have to take care of yourself. So it's actually an interesting like radical change of like thinking. It's like being selfish is actually not selfish. Right. It's not an act of being like selfish.
Being generous.
It's being generous to yourself so that you can then be generous to others. Yeah, wow, mind blown moment right now on the podcast.
I love it.
Yeah.
So, in wrapping up, if you had just like words of wisdom that you commonly find yourself sharing with others, or if something just sort of like springs organically to your heart in this moment, or advice, or something that comes easy to you, what would you share?
I think for me, the the closest distance between two people is a story. I've said that. It's not my quote, somebody else's. I don't know whose it is. It's different variations, right? But I connect that to something that I say often is that, everyone has a story, right? And if you don't tell your story, then somebody else will, and they'll get it wrong. And so if you are upset at your story being misrepresented, then the only thing that you can do is to then take that agency back and to tell your story. One of the earliest praises that I got for the work that I do specifically with young people, somebody said that it's so great that you're giving those young people a voice. And I said, I'm not giving them a voice. Like they have a voice. Like I'm creating a space for them to find their voice, to develop their voice, to publicly present their voice. Like I'm not giving them a voice, right? Like they have it.
You
Like
didn't give them a story.
I didn't give them a story. They have it, right? And so I think that those are kind of the guiding principles, and that's even outside of my work. Like yeah, I pay my bills, most of them by doing workshops and facilitating, different type of storytelling and writing and events. But I think even just in my life in general, when I'm not teaching a workshop, you can still create space for individuals to tell their stories, right? Sometimes even one of my admin assistant in my offices in Mesa, sometimes you just spend the morning talking about what's going on. It's like, how you doing today? Like what's going on? I can sense that, and not just, me not, and it's not one, it's also not just me, like as a savior, like, how are you doing today, Jessica? Like some days that I need to talk, some days she creates and holds space for me to talk through some of my anxieties. And that has nothing to do with a workshop. Has nothing to do with, like this is just organically us creating space for each other to tell our stories and to process things. And so if I had to close with something, it's just like find those spaces, whether they're organic conversations with people or like more curated spaces for you to tell your story, because by you telling your story, it's going to do two things. It's going to, one, it's going to help you process things. Like that's just one of the most beautiful aspects of storytelling, is that, at least for me, it's like, it's for me first. It's helping me process things. But then when it gets to a place and you've decided that, okay, I want to now share this with the world, you've then just kind of like connected a link to somebody else. And it's just like, it's this kind of like synergy that's built, because we're very divided as a people. And justfully so. There's a lot of reasons why we're divided, right? One thing that I think is it's something I'm processing a lot, is that privilege is a very real thing, right? But it's also very nuanced. There's intersections to privilege, and you can't ignore privilege, right? But pain is relative. You can oftentimes measure someone's privilege in a particular situation, right? You can take two people and say, all right, based on socioeconomical, like systematic structures, this person has more privilege in this particular system,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't measure their pain. You can't say the person with the more privilege
Or happiness.
you know what I mean, has less pain than this person. And that pain, it's what connects us. And when we share that pain and we share those stories, we create, this synergy in the world. And so, yeah.
I remember being a little reluctant to share things that I had written, in my writing coach saying, but this, kind of encouraging me, saying like, but this holds a map in it. Like there's instructions in here. This is an instruction manual. So like if someone else finds themselves going through a similar experience, this is almost like a map to help them navigate their way through.
Yeah. It's a really cool way to think about it.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And since we all have that pain,
Yeah.
every human has pain.
Yeah. 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 It's part of life.
So for those of you who are listening and you want to take a trip to beautiful Phoenix, Arizona, we have folks coming in from all over the country. We have some coming from internationally for the Flower Lounge event on the 16th, as well as the Speakeasy on Friday, February 15th. We'll be doing an incredible workshop led by Tomas. Do you want to just give a few words about what people could expect and what they're in for and what they could be excited about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first day of the workshop, the kind of speakeasy aspect is going to be content creation. So we're going to enter into a space where we're going to dive in, and it's kind of what we've been talking about is I think the first thing that anyone should do in a space like a curated storytelling space is to think about all the things, right, that you would never tell anybody. Those are the best stories. Those are the best stories. Like all the stuff that you would never tell anybody, that's where we should start, and it's a scary thought, right? And so I think there's an easy way to get into it, right? But it's through those there's a reason why you don't want to tell anybody these stories, and it's usually because it holds some type of fear for you, right? A fear of judgment, or right. But as going back to what you said, it also holds a map, right? I think I'm going to totally steal that from you. So I'm taking that. It holds a map to figuring out the nuanced complexities of humanity, right? And so, so we're going to do some content creation. We're going to make a mess. I'm going to kind of like facilitate you through this idea of making a mess, like do not let the editor in the room, and I'll provide a couple of different starting points to writing, because that's the other thing too. It's like, well, how do I start this? And it's like, there's no one way to start writing. I have a variety of different ways that I start writing, and it really just depends on the circumstances. Like if I have more time, or if I'm feeling inspired, or, so kind of looking at different methods to starting. And then in the second day, and eventually the goal is in that first content creation, everyone will walk away with at least a rough draft of a poem or a story or a poetic narrative, whatever you want to call it, that is connected to a part of them that they are then going to take into the next day. And we'll kind of introduce what do you do with that mess? Like now we got to get into the because there's various different platforms to be able to storytell, right? Did you start a story that is going to be a book? Did you start a story that is going to be a 3-minute poem? Did you start a story that's going to be a 60-minute play, right? Like there's various different platforms to telling your story. And so the editing process, not as exciting as making a mess at times, but it really does allow you to kind of go in and shape it and mold it into fit into various different platforms. And and the other thing too is like there is absolutely still opportunities to be creatively driven through the editing process, right? One way that I tell people, like a poetic narrative, for example, is I tell people, or I suggest that don't try to write a poem, write a story, right? In the beginning, there was, once upon a time, right? And then when you go through the editing process, then you can kind of look at the ways that you can then format it and mold it into a poetic narrative, right? It's like, oh, now you can look at this particular chunk of your story, and do you want to introduce a metaphor and extend that metaphor? Do you want to use alliteration, right? So the editing process is oftentimes not as fun as making a mess, but a very important part to, like taking it to the next level. So,
but I could imagine it'd be like be like cooking. Like as you were talking, I was imagining like this really juicy burger.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point you might be like, dang, I don't need this top half of the bun. It's just too much.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the way it is with the tomato and the
Mm-hmm.
onion, like this is perfect. I don't need this big chunky bun piece here. I'm
Yeah.
like hack that off, and you could just start creating like new exquisite creations that you didn't know were possible based on hacking stuff off.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe you get rid of the top half of the bun, but you decide to add a layer of lettuce, right? Or you know what I mean? Or you like, you know what would really go well with this? The avocado. I didn't think about the avocado when I was making the mess, or so yeah, I mean the editing process for me, it's fun. It is fun because it is definitely a place where I tighten up what it is that I'm creating, and oftentimes the emotional side of why I created it has subsided enough for then I can go in and be a little critical, right? And I can, it's very difficult at times. Sometimes you have to step away from a piece, especially if it's written from an emotional standpoint. You can't go in the next day and it's like, all right, well, I know I just got my heart broke yesterday and I wrote this poem yesterday, but I'm okay today, right? It's like, no, you got to step away for a little bit, but then you go back in and then you're like, you can, be even more creative because you're not writing so much from an emotional place anymore. It's not bad, but yeah.
And so for folks who do not consider themselves writers, maybe you don't even consider
they're
themselves
not alone. Me neither.
Creative. Great. Okay, so what we're saying essentially is you can show up on Friday night. You're not a writer. You're doing something totally different in your life.
Yeah.
You have what it takes. You have the capacity. You, Tomas, are going to lead them through a process and a system to pull out some juicy stuff that they can work with.
Yeah.
And then if you choose to come back the next day on Saturday for the tightening up, editing, then you'll see your piece molded and shaped into an even more interesting form.
Yeah. Yeah. Or at least definitely walk away with the techniques to do that, like, so for example, if maybe you don't consider yourself like a writer in the sense that you haven't submitted anything to be published, but you write, you have a collection of journaling or poetry, right? The first night will be content creation, so different ways to approach writing. And then say maybe you start to write something, but it is in this really raw place and you're not ready to edit it the very next day, but you have other pieces that you've worked on, right? You can take the good thing about, I try to look at and frame the workshops as you're accumulating tools that you can use at any time, right? And so different tools that you'll be able to put to use at any time. So yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, bring your tool belt, metaphorically speaking. Hey, I did that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us on the podcast. And I cannot wait for February 15th to Speakeasy, Tomas. And for those of you who are listening, can encourage you enough to come, even if it's something that feels a little scary. It's going to be amazing.
Yes. Yeah, come. Even if, I want people who are terrified and I shouldn't say this, but I will anyway, because I live on the edge. It's like, I don't want anybody who considers themselves a writer to come. They're going to just mess up the vibe. Actually, you don't do it that way, Tomas. Oh, really? Oh, really? You take your MFA and you get out of here. I'm just kidding. You can bring your MFA, right? Just come willing to be vulnerable. I think that's the most important thing is like, if wherever you're coming from,
right,
whether you're a published writer with an MFA and, like one thing that I think this is another closing moment. One of the reasons why I like working with young people so much is that oftentimes, so there's a theory or a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right? And it's this banking model of education where a student is an empty vessel. They have no experience or knowledge. There's nothing that person can provide me.
Oh boy.
Right. And I am the bank. I have all the wealth and I'm just going to dump all my wealth into this person. Right. And it's a totally failed model. Right. The reality is that every single person has something to contribute to the circle, right? And so I may be the facilitator and I may be providing you tools, but in the same way that you just told me about the map, like I'm putting that into my tool belt, So as long as you come vulnerable and open to learning and growing from everyone that's there, not just me, from everyone that's there, then that's the energy that I would love to see in the space.
Even if you come aspiring to feel vulnerable.
Yeah, aspiring to feel vulnerable. Know about
Scared
this
as hell, but
vulnerability
aspiring
thing.
to be vulnerable.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us on the Flowerlounge podcast. And thank you, Tomas, again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.